Is Russia already at war with NATO? In the past few weeks, tensions between Russia and NATO have escalated faster than at any point since the Cold War. What began as isolated airspace violations has turned into a pattern that many analysts are now describing as deliberate provocations. The question that's beginning to echo across Europe's defence circles is chilling. Has the war between Russia and NATO already begun? Let's unpack what's been happening and what it might mean. In mid-September, reports began emerging of Russian drones entering the skies over Poland. According to Poland's defence ministry, at least 19 drones breached Polish airspace on September the 9th, forcing NATO aircraft to scramble. Several were shot down. Just days later, similar incursions were reported over Romania. Then, on September the 19th, 3 Russian MiG-31 fighter jets flew into Estonian airspace, and this time they stayed there for 12 minutes before Italian fighter jets intercepted them and turned them back. These weren't isolated incidents. Within the same week, suspected Russian drones were spotted near Denmark and Norway's main airports, prompting emergency closures and temporary flight suspensions. Over the Baltic Sea, German jets intercepted Russian aircraft flying dangerously close to NATO air patrols. To European governments, this sudden surge in activity looks less like coincidence and more like strategy. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk issued one of the strongest warnings yet. Speaking in Warsaw, he stated, "Poland will not hesitate to shoot down objects that violate its airspace and pose a threat." It was a direct message to Moscow, and also a signal to NATO that Poland is prepared to act decisively, even if others hesitate. At the United Nations General Assembly, US President Donald Trump echoed this sentiment. He told reporters that NATO should be willing to shoot down Russian aircraft that violate member airspace, saying, if they cross that line, they should be shot down. When pressed on whether the US would support NATO in such an engagement, Trump's response was notably cautious. "It depends on the circumstance," he said, before adding, "We are very strong toward NATO."
Do you think that NATO countries should shoot down Russian aircraft if they enter their airspace?
Yes, I do.
Would you back them up? Would the United States help them out in some way?
Depends on the circumstance, but, we're very strong toward NATO.
This measured tone highlights a major concern within the alliance, that not all NATO members agree on what level of aggression warrants a military response. And that ambiguity is exactly what Russia may be exploiting. The latest wave of airspace incidents coincided with Russia's large-scale Zapad military exercises in Belarus, drills involving around 13,000 troops. According to European intelligence assessments, these drills included the testing of Russia's Iskander missile systems, capable of carrying nuclear warheads. The timing is critical. The missiles are expected to be delivered to Belarus by the end of 2025, putting much of Central and Eastern Europe within range. In response, Poland, Lithuania and Latvia temporarily closed parts of their airspace during the drills, prepared to shoot down any aircraft that strayed across the border. Poland also deployed 40,000 troops to its eastern frontier. This scale of mobilization hasn't been seen in Europe in decades, a clear indication of how seriously NATO countries are treating these incursions. Following Poland's invocation of Article 4, the NATO clause allowing consultations when a member feels threatened, the alliance announced Operation Eastern Sentry. France, Germany, Denmark and the UK all sent fighter jets to strengthen NATO's aerial defence network across Eastern Europe. This new mission builds on NATO's Baltic air policing programme, but expands its reach, stretching from the Arctic Circle down to the Mediterranean. Eastern Sentry is designed not just to defend against Russian aircraft, but also to deter them by maintaining a constant visible NATO presence along the eastern border. Military analysts at the Royal United Services Institute argue that NATO's decision to ramp up its presence is both a defensive and political move, a way of showing unity to counter Russia's attempts to divide the alliance. While NATO defines an armed attack as one that triggers Article 5, the clause that treats an attack on one member as an attack on all Russia seems to be operating deliberately below that threshold. Instead of tanks crossing borders, the Kremlin uses hybrid warfare tactics: drones, cyber attacks, sabotage operations, and disinformation campaigns. These are the tools of what defence experts call grey zone warfare, a strategy designed to provoke, confuse, and weaken without triggering an open war. The goal is to keep NATO guessing, to stretch its resources and test its resolve. The pattern is familiar. Russia used similar tactics before its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, probing defences, spreading propaganda, and denying involvement when caught. Inside Russia, the Kremlin's messaging has shifted dramatically. State-controlled media and senior officials have started describing NATO as an active combatant in the Ukraine conflict. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov recently said NATO is already at war with Russia, claiming that Western weapons and intelligence are directly targeting Russian forces. This kind of language isn't just rhetoric, it's preparation. By convincing the Russian public that NATO is the aggressor, Putin can justify more aggressive policies, greater mobilization, and potentially even military confrontation. Analysts at Carnegie Endowment for International Peace warn that this shift in tone could signal that Moscow is laying the groundwork for a broader confrontation with the West. On paper, a full-scale war between Russia and NATO would be catastrophic for Moscow. NATO's combined military power dwarfs Russia's in every major category, from GDP to aircraft, naval strength, and technology. If Russia is struggling to maintain momentum in eastern Ukraine, how could it possibly challenge the entire Western alliance? But that's not necessarily the point. As many defense analysts point out, Russia doesn't need to win a conventional war to achieve its objectives. It just needs to make Europe believe that one could happen. By maintaining a constant level of tension, Moscow can discourage investment, fracture alliances, and manipulate public opinion in Europe. Fear becomes a weapon in itself. Moreover, Russia's nuclear arsenal remains its ultimate deterrent. With around 6,000 nuclear warheads, Russia still holds the largest stockpile in the world. This makes any potential NATO response to provocations extraordinarily complicated. Every military planner in Brussels knows that one miscalculation could lead to escalation beyond control. Another critical element is US leadership. Trump's recent remarks have raised eyebrows across Europe. While he reaffirmed NATO's importance, his hesitation to commit unequivocally to defending smaller eastern members has created uncertainty. If, for instance, Russian aircraft violated Estonian airspace and a NATO response led to a skirmish, would Washington truly back a rapid escalation? This question isn't theoretical. It goes to the heart of NATO's deterrence doctrine. Deterrence only works if it's credible. If Moscow believes that NATO won't respond decisively, then the alliance's strongest weapon, the promise of unity, begins to weaken. Trump's shifting tone on Ukraine adds to the ambiguity. On Truth Social, he recently said, "I think Ukraine, with the support of the European Union, is in a position to fight and win all of Ukraine back in its original form." It's a striking change from his earlier criticism of US spending on the war. But even so, ambiguity remains. Some European diplomats fear that Trump's unpredictability could embolden Putin to push boundaries further before the US election cycle dominates Washington's attention. As tensions rise, European nations are racing to close the gaps on their defences. On September 26, defence ministers from Bulgaria, Estonia, Finland, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Romania and Denmark met with the EU's Defence Commissioner to discuss building a drone wall, a joint network of radar systems, cameras and anti-missile batteries designed to detect and intercept drones and aircraft entering EU territory from the east. Ukraine has also joined the initiative, bringing valuable battlefield experience in counter-drone warfare. The goal is to create a digital shield stretching from the Arctic to the Black Sea, a visible reminder to Moscow that Europe is ready to defend its skies. Still, the project faces challenges. Analysts warn that it could take years to become fully operational, and Russia may try to exploit that window of vulnerability. As one European defense official told Reuters, Moscow will try to get as many drones across the border as possible before the wall is built. So, is Russia already at war with NATO? Not in the traditional sense. There are no tanks rolling across borders or missiles striking NATO cities. But in another sense, yes. What we're witnessing is the early stage of a new kind of conflict. One fought with information, drones, cyber weapons, and economic pressure, rather than bullets and bombs. NATO is being tested, not in open combat, but in its ability to remain unified under pressure. Russia's goal isn't to defeat NATO outright, but to make it paralyze itself with indecision. If even one country hesitates to respond to aggression, the alliance's foundation begins to crack. As retired US General Ben Hodges put it, the Russians are not just probing our air defences, they're probing our political will. For now, NATO's leaders are trying to strike a balance, showing strength without triggering escalation. But as Russian drones continue to buzz across Europe's skies and propaganda paints the West as an enemy, that balance is becoming harder to maintain. Ultimately, what's unfolding isn't just about airspace. It's about the future of European security. Since the end of the Cold War, Europe has lived under the assumption that peace was permanent. But the events of 2025 are shattering that illusion. The front lines of global power are shifting again from Kyiv to Tallinn, from Warsaw to the Arctic. If Russia's strategy is to keep NATO divided, then the alliance's survival will depend not on weapons, but on unity. History has shown that when democracies stand together, they are strongest. But when they start debating who should act first, they become vulnerable. So while it may not look like World War III, the truth is that the opening moves may already be underway, unfolding quietly in the skies above Europe, one drone at a time. Like, comment, and subscribe if you want to stay informed about the stories shaping our world.